So what are the factors that lead to anxiety disorders? Yes, sometimes people come and say, for example, I lost a loved one. After that, my panic attack started. Or they say, I experienced such an event, I had an accident, and after that, my general anxiety disorder began. Anxiety disorders do not stem from a single event. Fundamentally, human beings are optimistic individuals, perhaps the only species that knows the fact that it is indeed mortal. Nevertheless, we manage to live without constantly thinking about death. That's why we have a basic sense of optimism. Yes, there are disasters, death, and illnesses, but we assume they won't happen to us or those close to us. Then something happens, and we realize it can happen to us too. Suddenly, that basic optimism collapses and our anxiety level rises. After this, we may start to experience symptoms of anxiety disorder. But sometimes our anxiety rises without reason. Nothing is wrong, everything is perfect. Why am I like this? This makes the person even more surprised and questioning. Sometimes stress can be a triggering factor. For example, if we work in a very intense, stressful job, our sympathetic nervous system gets used to constantly working overtime. We are constantly living at a high pace. Then we suddenly realize that when we slow down the pace and go home, we just can't manage to calm down. Our anxiety is still high. At that point, we can say that an anxiety disorder has started. We could say that it's time to seek help. So, doctor, can we say that in order to cope with stress, it's also important not to develop an anxiety disorder? Yes, in other words, we can say that stress makes it easier to develop an anxiety disorder in the long run. That's why coping with stress is an important factor. Maybe at this point, it might also be time to seek support from psychologists. If we really can't cope with stress, for example, what do you recommend to your clients who come to you because of stress? As you said, doctor, stress isn't something that can be completely eliminated. Therefore, in our sessions, we first define what stress is. What is the person experiencing? How do they make sense of it? How do they feel? Then we start working on these issues. These could include breathing exercise techniques. It could also be about regulating sleep and nutrition patterns. Following that, time management and planning. And finally, we can say it's being able to share the emotions they're experiencing with close people around them. Yes, in other words, social environment is actually a very important factor. When it comes to coping with depression, dealing with the negative things that happen to us, or managing stress and anxiety disorders, social environment is truly very important. I forgot. What was I doing? Where was I going? I have some questions. Okay, I continued spontaneously here, but then I left. Yes, if stress has truly led to sleep disorders, chronic inability to relax, or physical complaints like muscle pain, then I think it's time to say that you should seek support from a specialist. I guess young people mostly come to you because of exam stress, right? Sure, I mean, especially recently, I have many students coming to me for this reason. Exam anxiety. How should we get support and cope? That is the point. Exam anxiety occurs when a student cannot effectively use the knowledge they have learned during the exam itself. This means they are experiencing it. And this exam anxiety can actually be experienced by students of all age groups. Therefore, to cope with exam anxiety, let's first transform our unhealthy thinking into healthy thinking. Let's try to think positively. We want you to pay attention to your sleep and eating habits. However, let's plan our time well because as time is wasted, stress and anxiety also increase. And finally, by setting achievable goals, we can actually cope with exam anxiety. Great.